Father sold his pregnant fat daughter to an Amish man as punishment, but what he did to her shocked an entire town. In the heat of a dusty auction yard, a desperate girl is treated like property, laughed at, betrayed by her own blood. But when a quiet stranger in plain black clothes steps forward, the crowd falls silent. He doesn't see disgrace, he sees someone worth saving. On the edge of the frontier, where railroads cut through tribal lands and justice bends to power, their unlikely bond sparks whispers and fury. Her father wants her child. The railroad wants his land. And in the shadows lies a secret treaty that could change everything. As the church bell tolls and the law comes knocking, one question burns hotter than any prairie fire. Will mercy and love be strong enough to defy shame, greed, and the iron will of men who would rather break her than let her rise? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the Colorado auction yard. Dust swirling in eddies around the feet of gathered townsfolk. Their whispers cut through the air like knives as Hazel stood trembling before them, her arms wrapped protectively around her swollen middle. Her father's face was a thundercloud of rage and shame as he gripped the wooden auction platform. "Railing! Let all witness!" he bellowed, his voice rough with anger. "This girl's disgrace brings shame on our family name. I wash my hands of her." His words fell heavy as stones in the dusty yard. The sheriff, Milton Drake, stood to the side, his weathered face impassive as he oversaw what he'd agreed to call a legal transaction. But there was nothing dignified about this spectacle. The crowd's snickers and cruel murmurs made that clear enough. Hazel kept her eyes fixed on her worn boots, unable to meet the stares of people she'd known all her life. Mrs. Peterson, who'd taught her Sunday school. Mr. Jenkins, who'd always given her extra peppermint sticks at his store. Now they all looked at her like she was something dirty, something broken. "Starting bid at $5, the sheriff announced, his voice flat and professional, as if he were selling livestock instead of a human being. The silence that followed was deafening. Then a quiet voice spoke from the back of the crowd. $1. The townspeople parted like a stream around a boulder, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man in simple dark clothes and a full beard. Ephraim Stoltzfus, the Amish farmer who lived out past Miller's Creek. He stood straight and steady, his eyes clear and calm despite the shocked murmurs that rippled through the crowd. What's he doing here? Surely he ain't serious. Hazel's father's face darkened further. "You mock this proceeding, sir?" "No." Ephraim's voice remained quiet but firm. "I make an honest bid." The sheriff looked around the yard. "Any other bids?" The silence stretched long and thick as molasses. Going once, going twice, he brought down his gavel with a sharp crack. "Sold to Mr. Stoltzfus for $1. Ephraim moved forward through the parting crowd, his steps measured and deliberate. Without ceremony, he shrugged off his black wool coat. The simple gesture somehow commanded more attention than all her father's shouting. With gentle hands, he draped the coat around Hazel's shoulders, shielding her from the piercing stares. Her father spat in the dust near Ephraim's feet. "You're welcome to her, then." He turned on his heel, mounted his horse, and rode away without a backward glance, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust and the echo of hoofbeats. The crowd began to disperse, though some lingered, hungry for more drama. But Ephraim paid them no mind. He spoke softly to Hazel, his voice meant for her ears alone. "My wagon is just there. Can you walk?" Hazel nodded, not trusting her voice. The coat around her shoulders was warm from his body heat, and it smelled of clean hay and honest work. She followed him to where a sturdy wagon waited, hitched to two patient draft horses, with the same careful movements he'd shown throughout. Ephraim helped her up onto the wagon seat. His hands were strong but gentle, and he was careful not to touch her more than necessary. Once she was settled, he climbed up beside her and took up the reins. The sun was sinking toward the mountains now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. As they left the auction yard behind, Hazel sat rigid beside him, her hands clenched in her lap, her whole body trembling like a leaf in autumn. She waited for him to speak, to make his intentions known, to show some sign of the cruel humor or righteous condemnation she'd faced from everyone else. But Ephraim simply drove, his hands steady on the reins, his eyes on the road ahead. The only sounds were the creak of wagon wheels, the soft thud of hoofs, and the evening wind sighing through the prairie grass. His silence wasn't threatening or awkward. It felt like a gift, a space to breathe after the suffocating shame of the auction yard. The coat around her shoulders grew heavier as the evening chill set in, and Hazel pulled it closer, allowing herself, for the first time that terrible day, to feel something other than fear. She didn't know what waited at the end of this wagon ride, but for now, wrapped in the quiet dignity this stranger had offered her, she felt the first fragile stirrings of hope. The wagon wheels creaked over the rutted dirt road, carrying them farther from town with each passing minute. The steady clip-clop of hooves marked time like a heartbeat. Hazel sat rigid on the wooden seat, still wrapped in Ephraim's coat, her mind whirling with the events of the afternoon. The setting sun painted long shadows across the prairie grass. A cool breeze carried the scent of sage and dust. The familiar landscape seemed different now, both threatening and full of possibility. She glanced sideways at the quiet man beside her. His strong hands held the reins loosely, guiding the horses with gentle confidence. Finally, when the silence grew too heavy to bear, Hazel gathered her courage. "Why?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Why did you do this?" Ephraim was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he did speak, his voice was soft but clear. "I had a wife once, Rebecca." He paused, adjusting the reins. "And a child. For a few precious minutes, I had them both." Hazel's breath caught in her throat. She watched his profile in the fading light, saw the grief etched there. "It was a difficult birth," he continued. "We lost the baby first. Then Rebecca followed." His words were simple, but the pain beneath them ran deep. "I could not stand idle today and watch another life cast aside. It would not be right." The honest answer settled over Hazel like a blanket. Not pity, not desire, not even purely Christian charity, but understanding. She pulled his coat tighter, suddenly aware of the precious cargo she carried beneath her heart as darkness crept across the land. Ephraim guided the wagon off the main road. He found a sheltered spot near a stand of cottonwoods where a small creek gurgled nearby. The horses' harnesses jingled as he unhitched them, his movements sure even in the growing dark. "I will make a fire," he said, gathering dry branches, "and set up shelter for you." Hazel watched as he efficiently built a small fire, the flames casting dancing shadows. From the wagon, he pulled a canvas shelter and set it up with practiced ease. The simple structure looked sturdy and dry. "If humble, you should have the shelter," he said, spreading a clean blanket inside. "I will sleep here, by the fire." The arrangement struck her as both proper and kind. Still, she felt awkward, accepting so much from a stranger. "I don't want to put you out of your way. It is no trouble." His voice was firm, but gentle. "The stars will be my roof tonight." From his stores, he produced a pot of beans and some cornbread. He warmed the beans over the fire, the homey smell making Hazel's stomach growl. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until that moment. When the food was ready, Ephraim bowed his head. "May I pray?" Hazel nodded, surprised. She wasn't used to such reverence over a simple meal of beans and bread. Her family's prayers had always been hurried affairs. When they happened at all, Herr Gott, were dank and dear, he began in German, then switched to English. Lord God, we thank you for this food, for safety on our journey, and for your guidance. Amen. The simple prayer touched something deep in Hazel's heart. They ate in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. The beans were plain but filling, the cornbread fresh and sweet. After the meal, Ephraim cleaned up efficiently, then settled himself by the fire with a worn Bible. "Rest well," he said. "We have many miles yet tomorrow." In the canvas shelter, Hazel lay on the blanket, still wearing Ephraim's coat. The night was alive with sounds: crickets chirping, the horses shifting in their picket line, the creek's gentle murmur. In the distance, coyotes began their nightly chorus, their wild songs echoing across the prairie. She touched her rounded belly, feeling the flutter of movement within. The events of the day seemed almost unreal now. That morning, she had woken in her father's house, dreading what was to come. Now she lay under strange stars, protected by a stranger's kindness. What had she been delivered into? The question circled in her mind like the coyotes' distant cries. But unlike the terror of the auction yard, this uncertainty held a glimmer of hope. Outside, she could hear Ephraim's quiet breathing, steady as the creek's flow. His presence was a comfort, even if his ways were foreign to her. The fire's glow filtered through the canvas, casting soft shadows. Hazel listened to the night sounds, her hand resting on her belly, and wondered what tomorrow would bring. Dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and golds, as Ephraim's wagon rolled into a clearing nestled among tall pines. Hazel straightened on the seat, taking in her first glimpse of what would be her new home. The homestead spread before them, humble but holding promise in every careful detail. A half-built barn stood to one side, its framework reaching toward the morning sky. Fresh-cut timber lay stacked nearby, waiting to complete the work. Unfinished fencing marked the property's boundaries, the posts set straight and true despite their incomplete state. The cabin drew Hazel's eyes, small but solid, built of rough-hewn logs carefully chinked against the weather. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, speaking of warmth within. Before it, neat garden plots showed signs of recent tending, rows of young plants reaching toward the sun. Ephraim brought the wagon to a gentle stop. "It isn't much," he said quietly, "but it's peaceful here." Hazel nodded, unable to find words. After yesterday's humiliation, the simple dignity of the place touched her deeply. "Let me show you inside," Ephraim said, helping her down from the wagon. Her legs were stiff from the long journey, and she moved carefully, one hand supporting her rounded belly. The cabin door opened with a creak of leather hinges. Sunlight streamed through to small windows, illuminating a single room that somehow managed to feel both spare and welcoming. An iron cook stove occupied one corner, its surface gleaming with care. Beside it stood a rough-hewn table with two straight-backed chairs. A narrow bed filled the opposite corner, topped with carefully folded quilts in deep blues and browns. Their geometric patterns spoke of patient hands and quiet evenings. A trunk beneath the window held what she assumed were Ephraim's few possessions. "You should take the bed," Ephraim said, setting her small bundle on the table. "I can make a pallet on the floor." Hazel's cheeks flushed. "Oh no, I couldn't. It's too much. I've imposed enough already. You need proper rest in your condition." His voice was firm but kind. "At least until after the child comes." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw no ulterior motive in his steady gaze. This was not about ownership or obligation, but genuine concern for her well-being. Something tight in her chest began to loosen. "Until the child comes," she agreed softly, "but not a day longer." Ephraim nodded, accepting the compromise. He built up the fire in the cook stove, then suggested they see to the evening chores while daylight remained. Behind the cabin, a small barn housed 2 goats. "They give good milk," Ephraim explained, picking up a clean bucket. "Would you like to learn?" Hazel eyed the goats uncertainly. She had never been this close to such creatures before. "I don't know how. I'll show you." He demonstrated the proper technique, his large hands moving with surprising gentleness. "Now you try." Hazel settled onto the milking stool, positioning her hands as he had shown. The goat shifted, and milk sprayed everywhere but the bucket. To her surprise, a laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside, the first time she had laughed in weeks. Ephraim's eyes crinkled at the corners. "It takes practice," he said, wiping milk from his sleeve. "But you'll learn." They worked together as the sun settled toward the horizon. Ephraim showed her where to store the milk in the cool spring house, then set about preparing a simple supper. Soon the cabin filled with the smell of vegetable soup made from stores he had laid by. They ate in comfortable silence, broken only by the clink of spoons against bowls and the occasional pop from the cook stove. The soup was plain but satisfying, seasoned with herbs from the garden, more than the food itself. Hazel savored the peace of the meal, no harsh words, no disapproving glares. Just the quiet companionship of breaking bread together as she helped clean up afterward. Hazel found herself studying the small cabin with new eyes. Yesterday, she had stood in an auction yard, her father's bitter words still ringing in her ears. Today, she stood in a place where dignity and kindness seemed built into the very walls. This was no prison sentence, she realized, but a true refuge. Ephraim wasn't offering servitude, he was offering sanctuary, asking nothing in return except that she accept the gift of safety he extended. The understanding settled over her like a warm quilt, bringing with it the first real sense of peace she had known since discovering her pregnancy. Here, in this humble cabin with its half-built barn and unfinished fences, she might finally find room to breathe, to heal, to prepare for the child that grew beneath her heart. Dawn crept across the homestead, painting the frost-covered grass in shades of gold. Ephraim rose from his pallet on the floor, careful not to wake Hazel. Through the cabin's small window, she watched as he stepped outside into the crisp morning air. He knelt in the yard, head bowed in silent prayer. The rising sun caught his broad shoulders, creating a peaceful tableau that made Hazel's throat tight with unexpected emotion. After several minutes, he rose and walked to the woodpile, picking up the axe with practiced ease. The steady rhythm of wood splitting filled the air. Thunk, pause, thunk, each stroke precise and measured. Hazel dressed quickly, determined to show she could contribute to the household. "Please," she said, stepping outside. "Let me help with the morning chores." Ephraim paused, wiping his brow. "Are you certain?" "There's no rush. I won't be a burden," she insisted. Squaring her shoulders despite her awkward shape, he nodded slowly. "The water barrel needs filling." The well's just there. Hazel grasped the wooden bucket, finding it lighter than expected when empty. The well stood only 20 paces away, its stone sides solid and weathered. She managed to draw up the first bucket without trouble, but as she turned toward the barrel, the weight shifted. Water sloshed over her skirts as she stumbled. The bucket slipped, spilling across the dirt. Tears sprang to her eyes, immediately not from pain, but from frustration and fear. Here was proof of her uselessness, just as her father had always claimed. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I'll try again." 9. Ephraim's voice was gentle but firm. He set down his axe and crossed to her. "Worth is not measured in strength alone, Hazel. There are many ways to contribute." She wiped her eyes, embarrassed. "But I must earn my keep." "You are not here to earn your keep," he said quietly. "You are here to heal and prepare for your child. That is enough." Before she could respond, the sound of wagon wheels drew their attention. A small cart appeared around the bend in the road, driven by a woman in a faded but clean dress. 2 children sat beside her, a boy and girl, perhaps 10 and 8 years old. "Mrs. Albright," Ephraim said, by way of greeting as the wagon stopped. Good morning to you." The woman climbed down, her movements brisk and practical. She carried a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Good morning, Ephraim. I thought I'd stop by and welcome your—" She paused, delicately guessed. Hazel tensed, expecting judgment, but Mrs. Albright's smile was warm and genuine. "I'm Sarah Albright, dear. These are my children, Thomas and Mary." The children waved shyly from the wagon. "I brought fresh bread," Mrs. Albright continued, unwrapping the bundle. The warm, yeasty smell made Hazel's mouth water. Nothing makes a place feel more like home than breaking bread together. "You are too kind," Hazel managed, touched by this simple gesture of welcome. "Nonsense. We're neighbors now." Mrs. Albright's practical tone held no room for argument. "Besides, I remember what it's like being new to these parts." A friendly face means the world. They shared the bread with butter and jam while Mrs. Albright chatted about practical matters: where to find the best eggs, which wild berries were safe to eat, how to predict weather from cloud patterns. Not once did she mention the circumstances of Hazel's arrival or ask probing questions. After the Albrights departed, Hazel felt lighter somehow. The simple act of being treated as a neighbor rather than an object of scandal had given her back a piece of her dignity. As evening approached, Ephraim brought out a leather-bound ledger and pencil. "I keep careful accounts," he explained, opening to a fresh page. "It is our way: honest records, honest dealings. Honest records, honest dealings." Hazel peered at the neat columns of figures. I never had much schooling," she admitted. "Father said it wasn't proper for girls to learn such things. Would you like to learn now?" Ephraim asked. She looked up, startled. "You would teach me?" "Knowledge is a gift from God," he said simply. "It should be shared." He moved his chair closer to hers. "See here, these columns are for expenses, these for income. Each transaction must be recorded precisely." Hazel bent over the ledger, following his patient explanations. The numbers danced before her eyes at first, but slowly began to make sense. Here was power she had never been allowed before: the ability to understand, to track, to know. "I want to learn everything," she whispered. "Then you shall," Ephraim promised. "Here, there is time for learning, for healing, for growing strong in your own way." In the quiet of the cabin, with the ledger open before them and the memory of Mrs. Albright's kindness still fresh, Hazel felt something shift inside her. Perhaps here, in this place of gentle strength and honest dealings, she could finally become more than her father's shame. The peaceful afternoon shattered with the thunder of hoofbeats. Hazel looked up from where she and Ephraim were hanging wash on the line, her hands freezing on a damp sheet. She knew that aggressive riding style, that particular rhythm of anger. Her father burst into the clearing atop his lathered bay horse, dust rising from its hooves. His face was mottled red with rage, his string tie askew. Several ranch hands hung back at the edge of the trees, watching. "This farce ends now," he roared, swinging down from the saddle. "That sale was nothing but a joke, girl. You're coming home where you belong." Hazel's legs trembled, but before she could speak, Ephraim stepped forward. He moved with deliberate calm, positioning himself between her and her father's advancing form. Though unarmed, his broad shoulders and steady stance formed a living wall of protection. "Double quotes, Mr. Albright," Ephraim said, his voice firm but gentle. "This is not the way of peace. Peace." Her father spat on the ground. "Don't speak to me of peace, Amish man. That's my property you're harboring." "No person can be property," Ephraim replied. "The law may have allowed that transaction, but God's law speaks differently. Hazel will not be taken anywhere against her will." Her father's hand twitched toward his gun belt. "You dare preach to me? You've no right. I have the right." Hazel's voice surprised even herself, small but clear in the tense air. She stepped out from behind Ephraim, though staying close to his steadying presence. "I choose to stay here." The words seemed to strike her father like physical blows. He stared at her, jaw working. "You ungrateful child. After everything I've done, everything you've done." Hazel's voice grew stronger, years of pain flowing into her words. "You sold me like cattle. You shamed me before the whole town. And now you claim it was a joke. Watch your tone, girl," he growled. "You forget your place." "My place is here," Hazel said. Her hands shook, but she kept them clasped tightly before her, protecting her swollen belly. "With people who treat me like a human being." Her father's face darkened to purple. "That bastard you're carrying is my grandchild. You think I'll let some plain-dressed farmer raise it? I'll use every law in this territory to claim that baby once it's born." Hazel stumbled backward as if struck. Ephraim's steady hand caught her elbow, supporting her. "The courts favor blood kin," her father continued, his voice cruel with triumph. "What judge would choose a stranger over a child's own grandfather, especially when that stranger's some religious oddity who won't even defend himself?" "Leave now," Ephraim said quietly. "You bring only pain to one who needs healing." Her father swung back into his saddle, reining his horse around sharply. "This isn't over. Not by far." He fixed Hazel with a cold stare. "Enjoy playing house with your peaceful farmer. When that baby comes, you'll learn what real power means." The horse's hooves thundered away, followed by the ranch hands. Dust settled slowly in the yard as the sound faded. Hazel's legs gave way. She collapsed onto a nearby milking stool, her whole body trembling. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they felt different from her usual tears of fear and shame. These were tears of relief, of liberation. For the first time in her life, he had chosen her own path. "He'll try to take my baby," she whispered. Ephraim's large, work-roughened hand settled gently on her shoulder. "God has not abandoned you, Hazel. Nor will I," she looked up at him, this quiet man who had become her protector. His face was solemn but peaceful, as if no threat could shake his foundation of faith. "How can you be so calm?" she asked. "He could bring the law down on us both, because I trust in something stronger than man's law," Ephraim replied. "And I have seen how God provides for those who stand firm in what is right." He paused, then added softly, "You showed great courage today." Hazel touched her belly, feeling the flutter of movement within. "I had too. Not just for myself anymore." She drew a shaking breath. "I've never spoken to him like that before. Never dared." "Sometimes the greatest act of faith is simply standing up and speaking truth," Ephraim said. "You chose light over darkness today. That choice has power." The afternoon sun slanted through the trees, warming Hazel's face. The wash still needed hanging. The goat needed milking, and ordinary life waited to be resumed. But something had changed in that clearing. She had changed. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me a place where I could find my voice." Ephraim squeezed her shoulder once, then stepped back. "Come. The day's work awaits, and dwelling on troubles won't make them lighter." Hazel stood, brushing off her skirts. Her father's threats still echoed in her mind, but they seemed less overwhelming here in the peaceful yard, with the smell of clean laundry and the sound of chickens scratching nearby. For the first time, she truly believed she had made the right choice. The days settled into a gentle rhythm at Ephraim's homestead. Each morning brought its own quiet dance of duties, milk sloshing into tin pails, hoe blades turning rich soil, cornmeal stirred into bubbling porridge. As Hazel's belly grew rounder, Ephraim adjusted their routine without comment. He simply appeared at her side during heavier tasks, taking the water bucket from her hands or lifting feed sacks before she could reach for them. One evening, as the sun painted the western sky in shades of amber and rose, Hazel stood at the cook stove stirring a pot of beans. The cabin door creaked open, and she turned to see Ephraim entering with a stranger, a tall native man wearing a mix of traditional clothing and settler garments. Her hands tightened on the wooden spoon as she remembered the cruel words she'd heard in town about savages. Hazel, Ephraim said warmly, "This is Henry Redhawk, my neighbor to the north." "Henry, this is Hazel, who's become part of my household." Henry's weathered face held a quiet dignity. He nodded respectfully to Hazel, his dark eyes kind. "The evening meal smells good," he said, his English clear and measured. "I've brought dried venison to trade for flour, if you're willing." Ephraim gestured to the table. "Join us first." "There's plenty to share," as they settled around the simple meal. Hazel noticed how naturally Ephraim and Henry interacted, like old friends comfortable in each other's presence. She served the beans and cornbread, trying to hide her nervousness as she passed Henry's plate. "Thank you," Henry said, inclining his head. "It has been some time since I shared a table like this. Since my wife walked on last winter, meals have been quiet." Hazel's heart softened at the gentle sorrow in his voice. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly. Henry acknowledged her words with a slight nod. After they ate, Ephraim built up the fire outside, and they gathered around its warmth in the cooling evening air. The flames cast dancing shadows as Henry began to speak of the land, how it had been before the railroad surveyors came with their measuring chains and paper. Promises this valley held elk herds so vast. "They moved like rivers through the grass," Henry said, his voice taking on a storyteller's cadence. "The old ones knew every spring, every medicine plant, every place where the earth spoke to those who listened. Now the iron horse brings more people each day, and the old ways grow dim like stars at dawn." Hazel leaned forward, drawn in by his words. She thought of how she'd once dismissed such stories, accepting without question the cruel dismissals she'd heard in town. Shame crept through her as she recognized the wisdom and loss in Henry's quiet telling. The fire popped, sending sparks skyward. Henry reached into his pack and drew out strips of dark, dried venison, wrapped carefully in cloth. "From last autumn's hunt," he explained. "The deer gave itself well. Ephraim nodded in appreciation, rising to fetch the promised flour from his stores. As the men completed their trade with few words but evident respect, Hazel watched their easy understanding with growing wonder. This was so different from the suspicious tensions she'd grown up with. Later, after Henry had departed and Ephraim banked the fire for the night, Hazel finally spoke the words that had been weighing on her heart. "I need to tell you something," she whispered in the cabin's darkness. "I'm ashamed of how I thought before about people like Henry. The terrible things I believed because others said them." Ephraim was quiet for a moment, his voice thoughtful when he replied, "Mercy is stronger than ignorance. Hazel, the heart can learn new ways when given the chance." He spoke so beautifully about the land, Hazel said. I never really listened before. Henry has taught me much about seeing this place through different eyes," Ephraim said. "His people read the land like we read our Bible, with reverence and deep knowing." Hazel placed a hand on her growing belly, thinking of the child within. "I want to learn better ways," she said firmly. "I don't want my baby to grow up carrying the same harsh judgments I did." "That choice alone shows wisdom," Ephraim replied. "God's love knows no boundaries of race or custom. We are all His children." Through the cabin's small window, Hazel could see stars scattered across the dark sky like silver dust. She thought of Henry's words about the old ones who knew their stories. Perhaps, she reflected, true strength lay not in clinging to prejudices, but in being humble enough to learn from those she'd once feared or dismissed. The lessons settled into her heart, like a seed planted in fertile soil, ready to grow into something new and beautiful. The summer sun warmed the Colorado earth, bringing new life to Ephraim's homestead. Hazel stood at the wooden table in the cabin, her hands deep in bread dough, working it with growing confidence. The rhythmic kneading had become familiar now, almost meditative. Through the open window, she could hear the bleating of goats and the cheerful voices of Mrs. Albright's children playing in the yard. Her belly had grown larger, but she moved with more assurance these days. The morning sickness had passed, leaving her with fresh energy for the daily tasks that now filled her life with purpose. The fresh-baked loaves cooling on the windowsill gave off a homey aroma that made her smile with pride. Miss Hazel. Little Sarah Albright called from outside. "Tell us another rhyme." Hazel wiped her hands on her apron and stepped to the door. The two children looked up at her eagerly, their faces bright with expectation. Memories of her own childhood surfaced, happy ones she hadn't recalled in years. "Here's one my mama taught me," she said, clearing her throat. "Lavender's blue, dilly dilly, lavender's green. When I am king, dilly dilly, you shall be queen." The children joined in as she repeated it, their voices rising sweet and clear in the summer air. Mrs. Albright, sitting in the shade mending a shirt, smiled warmly. "You have such a way with them," she said. "They'll be singing that all week now, I reckon." The peaceful afternoon shifted suddenly when Thomas, Mrs. Albright's older child, shouted and pointed toward the fence line. "Someone's falling." Hazel shaded her eyes against the sun and saw a figure staggering along the fence before crumpling to the ground. Ephraim, who had been repairing a wagon wheel nearby, rushed to the fallen man. "Mrs. Albright, best get the children home," Hazel called, hurrying toward Ephraim as quickly as her condition allowed. Her heart pounded with concern, but she felt none of the helplessness that would have paralyzed her months ago. The man lay in the dust, his clothes bearing the grime of railroad work. His face was gaunt, his breathing labored with awful coughing spasms. Fever burned in his hollow cheeks. "He needs help," Ephraim said simply. Already moving to lift the stranger together, they brought him into the cabin. Hazel's hands trembled slightly as she helped settle him on Ephraim's pallet. The illness frightened her, especially with her condition. But she couldn't turn away someone in need. "I'll fetch fresh water," she said, moving with purpose. She soaked clean cloths in cool water and placed them on the man's forehead. Remembering how her own mother had once tended her through fever, the railroad worker drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally muttering about cruel foremen and dangerous working conditions. Hazel kept vigil, changing the cool cloths and offering sips of water when he could take them. As evening approached, Ephraim came in from finishing the day's chores. He stood quietly for a moment, watching Hazel tend to their unexpected guest. "This home," he said softly, "it's becoming a haven for those who need rest. First you, now him. Perhaps that's what the Lord intended." Hazel looked up, surprised to feel pride warming her chest at his words. This place had indeed become more than just shelter. It was turning into a true home where healing could happen. After supper, with the sick man sleeping more peacefully, Hazel and Ephraim sat in the gentle quiet of approaching night. The firelight cast dancing shadows on the walls and through the window. Crickets sang their evening songs. Hazel's hands rested on her rounded belly as she gathered courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Rescuing me that day at the auction yard." Ephraim turned to her, his face gentle in the flickering light. "Every day proves it was Providence," he answered, his voice carrying the quiet certainty of deep faith. Hazel let his words sink in, feeling their truth. She was no longer the frightened, shame-filled woman who had arrived here. In serving others, teaching children, tending the sick, creating a welcoming home, she had found something precious, her own worth. The fire crackled softly, and Hazel felt the baby move within her. Here, in this simple cabin with its door open to those in need, she had discovered that survival alone wasn't enough. True living meant having the strength to reach out to others, to nurture and care, to create a place where weary souls could find rest. She thought of the bread she'd baked that morning, the children's laughter as they learned her rhymes, and now this sick stranger sleeping under their roof. Each act of caring was like a stitch in a quilt, weaving together a life more meaningful than she'd ever imagined possible. The October wind whistled through the gaps in the cabin walls, carrying the sharp bite of early winter. Dried leaves skittered across the yard like nervous mice in the darkness. Inside, Hazel shifted restlessly on her bed, unable to find comfort as pain gripped her lower back. Another cramp seized her, stronger than before. She gasped, clutching her swollen belly. Fear bloomed in her chest as she realized what was happening. The baby was coming, weeks earlier than expected. "Ephraim," she called out, her voice trembling. "The baby, it's time." Ephraim rose quickly from his pallet by the fire, crossing the room in 2 long strides. His calm presence steadied her, though she could see worry in his eyes. "I will fetch help," he said, already pulling on his coat. "The midwives from the settlement. And Henry, he knows these paths better than any man in darkness." Hazel nodded, biting her lip as another pain washed over her. "Please hurry." The night air rushed in as Ephraim stepped out. Minutes later, she heard the sound of hoofbeats fading into the darkness. She was alone with her fear and the howling wind. Time stretched like molasses. The pains came faster now, each one stealing her breath. She paced the small cabin, one hand pressed against her back, the other steadying herself against the rough-hewn walls. The first pale light of dawn was creeping through the windows when she heard horses. Approaching Mrs. Albright burst in first, her shawl askew but her eyes alert. "I was at Henry's when Ephraim found us," she explained, immediately taking charge. "Let's get you comfortable, child." Henry Redhawk followed, arms full of firewood. Without a word, he moved to stoke the dying embers into a proper blaze. The cabin soon grew warmer as he worked steadily, keeping the fire strong against the autumn chill. 2 Amish midwives arrived next, their black bonnets barely ruffled despite the hard ride. They spoke quietly in Pennsylvania Dutch to each other as they unpacked their supplies. Their movements sure and practiced. Hours passed in a blur of pain and exhaustion. Hazel lost track of time, aware only of the encouragement of the women around her and the steady presence of Henry, who kept the fire burning bright. Mrs. Albright never left her side, wiping her brow with cool cloths and murmuring prayers. "Lord, watch over this child and mother," Mrs. Albright prayed, holding Hazel's hand through another contraction. "Guide them safe through this valley." The sun had crossed most of the sky when the older midwife announced it was time to push. Hazel gathered her remaining strength, crying out with the effort. The cabin filled with the tension of waiting, broken only by the crackling fire and the wind's moan. Suddenly, a new sound pierced the air, the sharp, angry cry of a newborn. Hazel fell back against the pillows, tears of relief streaming down her face. Through blurred vision, she saw Ephraim step forward as the midwife placed the wrapped bundle in his arms. Ephraim's broad shoulders shook as he held the baby, tears flowing freely down his cheeks. The stern lines of his face softened as he gazed at the tiny red face peering out from the blankets. "A son," the midwife announced, smiling, strong and healthy. Hazel watched Ephraim with the baby, remembering the story of his loss. Her heart swelled with sudden certainty. "Samuel," she whispered. "His name is Samuel." Ephraim's head snapped up, his eyes wide with emotion. He knew she had chosen his lost son's name. He nodded, unable to speak through his tears, but his gratitude shone clear as daylight. The midwives bustled about, cleaning and setting things in order. Henry smiled softly from his place by the fire, offering a quiet blessing in Ute. Mrs. Albright squeezed, Hazel's hand one last time before rising to prepare some broth. As night fell again, the helpers departed one by one, leaving the new family in peace. Hazel sat propped up in bed, cradling Samuel against her chest. The baby's weight felt right in her arms. His tiny fingers curled around one of hers. Ephraim knelt beside them, one large hand gently stroking the baby's dark hair. Heavenly Father, Ephraim prayed aloud, his voice rough with emotion. We thank thee for this precious gift. Thou hast restored my family through thy mercy. Bless this child, Samuel, and his mother. Guide us as we raise him in thy light. Hazel leaned back, exhausted but filled with joy. Samuel sighed in his sleep, and outside, the autumn wind gentled, as if nature itself was pausing to witness this moment of grace. The days after Samuel's birth settled into a gentle rhythm. Autumn sunlight filtered through the cabin windows, casting warm patches where Hazel sat in the rocking chair, nursing her son. The steady creak of wood against floorboards matched the peaceful rise and fall of Samuel's tiny chest as he fed. Outside, Ephraim's footsteps crunched through fallen leaves as he moved between chores. He insisted on handling everything himself, feeding livestock, chopping wood, hauling water. Each time Hazel tried to rise and help, he would appear at her side with a gentle hand on her shoulder. The work will wait, he said softly. You need rest to heal. The morning after Samuel's birth, Mrs. Albright arrived with a basket of fresh bread and apple preserves. Her children trailed behind her, eyes wide with curiosity at the new baby. The little ones pressed close, peering at Samuel's sleeping face. He's so tiny, whispered the youngest girl, reaching out one finger to touch his blanket. More visitors followed throughout the week. Women from the Amish settlement brought quilts stitched with intricate patterns, their rich colors brightening the cabin's plain walls. Each gift came with quiet blessings and genuine smiles, so different from the cruel faces Hazel remembered from that terrible day at the auction yard. On the third afternoon, Henry Redhawk appeared in the doorway, carrying something wrapped in soft deerskin. Hazel sat up straighter, adjusting Samuel against her shoulder. The Ute man's usual reserve melted slightly as he approached, revealing the gift he'd brought, a small cradle, lovingly carved from pale wood. For the little one, Henry said, setting it down beside her chair. His skilled hands had worked delicate patterns into the wood-running deer, soaring eagles, and flowing water. Hazel ran her fingers over the smooth surface, tears welling in her eyes. Henry, it's beautiful, she whispered. Thank you. He nodded, a gentle smile touching his eyes. Every child should sleep in beauty. Each evening, after the day's visitors departed, Ephraim would sit beside Hazel's bed with his worn Bible. His deep voice filled the cabin as he read by lamplight, choosing passages about new beginnings and God's mercy. Samuel slept peacefully in his new cradle, while verses of hope and redemption wrapped around them like a warm blanket. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, Ephraim read one night. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Hazel watched her son's peaceful face in the cradle, marveling at his tiny fingers and the dark sweep of his eyelashes. Just months ago, she had thought herself beyond hope, standing trembling in that auction yard. Now, watching Samuel sleep, her heart felt so full it might burst. The lamp burned low one evening as Hazel sat in her rocker, humming softly to Samuel. Ephraim settled in his chair by the fire, the flames casting shifting shadows across his strong features. In the comfortable silence, she studied his profile, noting how the stern lines of his face had softened since Samuel's arrival. I never thought could feel such joy again, Ephraim said quietly, still gazing into the fire. After Rachel and the baby, his voice caught slightly. That grief felt like a wound that would never heal. He turned to look at Hazel, his eyes warm in the firelight. But you and Samuelu have brought life back to this home. Back to me. Hazel's heart quickened at his words. "You gave me back my dignity," she replied softly. "When everyone else saw only shame, you saw a person worth saving." Their eyes met across the room, and something unspoken passed between them. Ephraim's smile held such tenderness that Hazel felt warmth spread through her chest. Samuel stirred in her arms, making small, contented sounds as he drifted deeper into sleep. The fire crackled softly, sending sparks up the chimney into the dark autumn night. Outside, a whippoorwill called, its lonely song somehow making their snug cabin feel even more blessed. Hazel settled deeper into her chair, surrounded by the evidence of neighbors' kindness, the quilts, the preserves. The lovely cradleland felt peace settle over her like a familiar shawl. These quiet evening moments, filled with shared glances and gentle smiles, spoke of something deeper growing between them. Neither rushed to name it, content to let it unfold naturally, like the steady turning of seasons. For now, it was enough to simply be here, their little family, safe and warm, while the first frost of winter painted delicate patterns on the cabin windows. The peaceful rhythm of their days shattered on a crisp morning in late autumn. Hazel stood at the wash basin, humming softly while Samuel cooed in his cradle nearby. The sound of approaching horses made her pause, water dripping from her hands. Ephraim looked up from mending a harness by the fire. His shoulders tensed as hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied by the rattle of wagon wheels. 3 men rode into the clearing: Hazel's father, the sheriff, and a well-dressed stranger in a dark suit. Hazel's heart jumped into her throat as she rushed to Samuel, scooping him into her arms. The baby sensed her fear and began to whimper. Her father's face was thunderous as he dismounted. The stranger stepped down from his wagon with practiced grace, brushing dust from his sleeves. A leather document case hung at his side. "Miss Turner," the stranger said, removing his hat. "I am James Mitchell, counsel for the Western Pacific Railroad Company." His voice carried the polished accent of Eastern schools. "We have some matters to discuss." Ephraim moved to stand beside Hazel, his presence steady and reassuring. "Whatever business you have can be conducted outside," he said firmly. "The child needs his rest." They gathered near the woodpile, autumn wind rustling through fallen leaves. Hazel clutched Samuel closer, her father's hostile glare burning into her. "The so-called sale of my daughter was a farce," her father spat. "No proper documentation, no legal witness, just frontier foolishness." The lawyer nodded, opening his case. "Indeed, I have reviewed the relevant statutes. The transaction holds no legal weight." He extracted several papers, holding them up to catch the light. "Furthermore, as Miss Turner's legal guardian, Mr. Turner retains full rights regarding the custody of her child." "No." Hazel's voice cracked. Samuel startled at her cry, his tiny face scrunching up. "You cannot take him from me." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Now, miss, let's keep calm. There is more," Mitchell continued smoothly. "The railroad's planned expansion requires a direct route through this valley. Mr. Stoltzfus, your land lies directly in the proposed path." He produced a map marked with neat red lines. "The company is prepared to offer fair compensation." Of course, Ephraim's expression remained neutral, though Hazel saw his jaw tighten. "This land was deeded to me by the territory 5 years ago. I have met every requirement for homesteading." "Legal circumstances have changed," Mitchell replied. "New railway regulations grant certain powers of eminent domain. If we cannot reach an agreement, the matter will be settled in court." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Ephraim, you know I respect you, but the law might not fall your way on either count. Best to consider their terms." Hazel's father stepped forward, reaching for Samuel. "Enough talk. Give me my grandson." Hazel backed away, tears streaming down her face. "Please, father, don't do this." Ephraim moved between them, his voice steady despite the tension visible in his shoulders. We will contest these claims through proper legal channels. Until then, Hazel and Samuel remain under my protection. Protection. Her father's laugh was bitter. A godless arrangement, living here, unmarried. You're no better than that's enough, the sheriff cut in. No need for ugliness. Mr. Mitchell, I believe you've delivered your message. The lawyer nodded, tucking his papers away. Indeed, you have 1 week to consider the railroad's offer, Mr. Stoltzfos. After that, we proceed with legal action. And I'll be back for the boy, Hazel's father added darkly. Count on it. They mounted up and rode away, leaving behind a heavy silence. Samuel's cries were the only sound in the clearing. Hazel's legs gave out. She sank to her knees in the fallen leaves, clutching Samuel as sobs racked her body. They'll take him from me, she wept. They'll take everything. Ephraim knelt beside her, his rough hand gentle on her shoulder. The Lord is my light and my salvation, he quoted softly. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? But the law, we will fight this, he said firmly. With faith and truth as our weapons, his blue eyes held steady conviction. God defends the weak and upholds the righteous. We must trust in his guidance. Hazel looked up at him through tears, drawing strength from his unwavering faith. Yet fear still coiled in her stomach like a cold snake. The thought of losing Samuel, of being torn from this home they had built, was almost unbearable. Samuel's cries softened as she rocked him. Ephraim's hand remained on her shoulder, warm and reassuring. They sat together in the autumn sunshine, leaves drifting around them, while dark clouds gathered on the horizon. The wagon wheels creaked along the rutted road toward town. Ephraim held the reins steady while Hazel cradled Samuel, wrapped snugly against the morning chill. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering around his future. Hazel's stomach tightened as the church steeple came into view. I haven't been back since. She couldn't finish the sentence. The Lord's house welcomes all, Ephraim said softly. Even those who forget that truth. They passed the auction yard where Ephraim had first rescued her. Hazel pulled Samuel closer, the memory of that day still raw. A group of women outside the general store stopped their conversation to stare. One whispered behind her hand. Eyes narrowed with judgment. Ephraim helped Hazel down from the wagon, his hands gentle but sure. As they walked toward the whitewashed church, more townsfolk gathered to watch. Their whispers carried on the wind, shameless. Bringing that child here, that Amish fellow's gone soft in the head. Railroad sort them out soon enough. Hazel lifted her chin, though her hands trembled. Samuel stirred against her chest, making small sounds of protest at being jostled. The preacher met them in his study, a sparse room smelling of leather-bound books and lamp oil. His weathered face showed concern as they explained their situation. This troubles me deeply, he said, running a hand through his graying hair. To separate a mother from her child, yet the law has its own wisdom. However harsh it may seem to our hearts, is there nothing to be done? Ephraim asked quietly. The preacher paced before his desk. The legal grounds are murky. Your arrangement, he glanced at Hazel. It lacks the proper foundations that courts respect, and the railroad's influence grows stronger each day. Hazel felt hope slipping away. But Ephraim remained steady beside her. However, the preacher continued. I cannot stand silent while injustice masquerades as law. If this comes before a judge, I will testify to what I've witnessed, a mother's devotion and a good man's mercy. Thank you, Hazel whispered, tears threatening. The preacher touched Samuel's head in blessing. God's justice often moves slower than man's greed. But it moves surely. By the time they left the church, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street. Mrs. Albright waited at her front gate, concern etched on her kind face. "You'll stay with me tonight," she insisted. "It's too late to travel back." And there's fresh bread cooling. Her small house welcomed them with warmth and the scent of baking. Her children helped set an extra place at the table. Fascinated by Samuel's tiny fingers and bright eyes, after supper, Ephraim stepped out to tend to the horses. Hazel sat by the window, rocking Samuel while Mrs. Albright cleared dishes. Through the open window, voices drifted from the saloon across the street. "Railroads offering good money," a man argued. "Fools to fight it. Easy to say when it ain't your land," another shot back. "My PA worked that South Ridge 30 years. Now some fancy paper says we got no right to it." Progress don't care about your PA's sweat. Railroads coming, like it or not. Progress? A bitter laugh. That what we're calling it when big money pushes little folks around? Hazel listened, understanding blooming in her heart. Their fight wasn't just about Samuel or Ephraim's land. It was about something larger, the right of common people to hold on to dignity in the face of powerful men who saw them as disposable. Mrs. Albright settled beside her, weathered hands folding a small quilt. "Whole territories changing," she said softly. "Some say it's God's will, this progress. But I reckon God cares more about how we treat each other than how fast a train can run." Samuel cooed, reaching for the candlelight. Hazel traced his perfect features, marveling at how one small life could matter so much. "When Tom, my husband, passed," Mrs. Albright continued, "folks said I couldn't manage alone. But here I am, raising my babies, keeping my home. Sometimes just standing your ground is victory enough." Through the window, Hazel watched Ephraim in the yard, his tall form outlined against the deepening dusk as he spoke quietly to the horses. His steadfast presence had changed everything for her. Together, they had built something precious, not just shelter, but true home. The saloon argument grew louder, voices carrying clearly now. Laws, the law. And what about right and wrong? Ain't always the same thing, are they? Hazel looked down at Samuel, sleeping peacefully in her arms. No, she thought. Law and justice weren't always the same. But sometimes you had to fight for one to achieve the other. The journey home from town left Hazel and Ephraim both weary. But sleep proved elusive that night. Dawn found them at the rough-hewn kitchen table, papers spread before them. Hazel held Samuel close as she practiced speaking the words they had carefully written out. "I choose to stay here of my own free." "Will," she repeated, her voice quavering. "My father has no right," she broke off, frustration clouding her face. "I sound frightened. You are brave to speak at all," Ephraim said gently. He sat across from her, his broad hands folded patiently. Truth needs no fancy words. Samuel wiggled in Hazel's arms, reaching for a shaft of sunlight that fell across the table. His innocent joy brought a small smile to her lips, giving her strength to try again. "I choose to stay here." She started over, her voice steadier now. "This is my home and Samuel's home. We have found peace here, and purpose." The crunch of hooves on gravel interrupted her practice. Through the window, they saw Henry Red Hawk dismounting from his pony. His face was serious as he approached the cabin door. Friend Henry Ephraim greeted him warmly. "Come in." Henry nodded, ducking through the doorway. He carried a leather satchel that showed years of wear. Without preamble, he set it on the table and drew out a carefully folded document. "My father kept this," he said, his voice deep and measured. "Before he walked the spirit road, he made me promise to guard it well." His weathered hands smoothed the paper with reverence. Hazel and Ephraim leaned closer. It was a map, the edges frayed, but the ink still clear. Careful lines marked out territories, with text in both English and Ute script. "This treaty map shows boundaries agreed upon 20 years past," Henry explained. Before the railroad men came with their new papers, his finger traced a particular section. This land, your land, was marked as neutral ground, neither for white settlement nor tribal hunting, but promised against seizure by any party. Ephraim's eyes widened. This could help our case. Perhaps Henry's expression remained guarded. Treaties with my people are often forgotten when gold or iron rails beckon, but this one bears the governor's seal. Even white man's courts must consider it. Hope flickered in Hazel's chest. You would share this with us? Henry's dark eyes met hers steadily. My father believed in keeping promises. So do I. He glanced at Samuel, who had fallen asleep in Hazel's arms. The young ones deserve to inherit truth, not lies. Ephraim stood and clasped Henry's shoulder. Thank you, brother. They spent the afternoon copying the map's vital details, Henry explaining the meanings of various markings. As dusk approached, he carefully refolded the original document. I will come to the hearing, he promised. My words will stand with yours. After Henry rode away, Hazel prepared their evening meal while Ephraim tended to the animals. The simple tasks felt different now, charged with purpose. This home they had built together was worth fighting for. When night fell, they sat before the hearth. Samuel slept peacefully in his cradle, the one Henry had carved. Flickering firelight cast moving shadows on the walls. Will you pray with me? Ephraim asked softly. Hazel hesitated. Though she had observed his daily prayers, she had never joined in speaking them. But tonight felt different. She nodded. Ephraim's deep voice filled the quiet room. Lord, we ask for strength in the days ahead. Let truth prevail over deception, and justice over greed, and mercy over shame, Hazel added, surprising herself. The words began to flow, trembling but true. Lord, I was lost, but you found me. I was cast aside, but you gave me shelter. Her voice grew stronger. I am not ashamed any more, not of my size, not of my past. You have remade me in mercy's image. Tears slid down her cheeks as she continued. The world saw me as worthless, too fat, too fallen. But here, in this home, I found my true worth. In caring for others, in working this land, in loving this child, I am made new. She felt Ephraim's quiet presence beside her, steady as always. When she opened her eyes, she saw tears on his face too. Amen, he whispered. The fire crackled softly. Samuel made small sleeping sounds in his cradle. Outside, a coyote called into the night, and somewhere far off, another answered. The simple peace of the moment wrapped around them like a warm blanket. Hazel looked at the copied treaty map on the table, its careful lines promising hope. Tomorrow, they would continue preparing for the hearing. But tonight, in this quiet moment of shared prayer, she felt stronger than she had in months. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The church pews creaked under the weight of what seemed like the entire town. Morning light filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across worn floorboards. Hazel sat beside Ephraim, clutching Samuel to her chest while her father's cold stare bore into her from across the aisle. The sheriff cleared his throat, shuffling through a stack of papers at the makeshift judicial table. We're here to settle matters of property and guardianship, he announced, his voice echoing in the hushed sanctuary. The railroad lawyer rose first, his eastern suit stark against the frontier backdrop. This land is vital for progress, he declared, unfurling survey maps. The railroad's expansion will bring prosperity to all. As for the child, the grandfather's rights are clear under territorial law. Hazel's father smirked, but his expression faltered when Ephraim stood. The Amish man's quiet presence commanded attention, his simple black coat a stark contrast to the lawyer's fine attire. I did not purchase a wife, Ephraim said softly. Yet his words carried to every corner. I offered sanctuary to a daughter of God. In his eyes and by our shared life, Haza is my wife in covenant." He turned to face her, his eyes gentle. Not by sale, but by choice and faith. Hazel's legs shook as she rose, Samuel secure in her arms. "I choose to stay," she declared, her voice growing stronger with each word. "My son is not property to be claimed. He is a gift from God, born into love, not shame." The crowd murmured as Henry Red Hawk stepped forward, his moccasins silent on the wooden floor. With deliberate care, he spread the treaty map on the table. "This land was promised neutral," he stated firmly. "The agreement bears your governor's seal." The preacher stood then, his Bible clutched tight. "Brothers and sisters," he thundered, "hear God's truth. He does not sell daughters, he redeems them." His fist struck the pulpit. This child was born in mercy's house, not bondage. Voices rose in agreement. Mrs. Albright nodded vigorously, and others followed. The sheriff studied the treaty map, then looked at Samuel sleeping peacefully in Hazel's arms. His weathered face softened. "The land stays with Stoltzfus," he ruled. "And the child with his mother." He faced the railroad lawyer. "Find another route for your tracks." Relief washed over Hazel like a cleansing rain. Ephraim's strong hand found hers, and together they stood vindicated before God and community. Peace settled over the homestead like a warm quilt in the weeks that followed. The rhythms of daily life took on a sweeter tone now that shadows of uncertainty had lifted. Hazel and Ephraim moved through their days as husband and wife, their love growing deeper with each shared task and gentle word. In the cabin's warmth, Samuel's happy gurgles echoed from the beautifully carved cradle Henry Red Hawk's gift of welcome. Hazel would pause in her work just to watch her son, marveling at how his tiny fingers reached for sunshine streaming through the window. The homestead became a gathering place. Drawing neighbors from far and wide, Mrs. Albright brought her famous apple pies, while other families arrived with dishes to share at Hazel's welcoming table. Even those who once whispered cruel words now broke bread beneath their roof. Won over by the grace they found their evening gatherings grew especially precious. Henry would share stories of his people's wisdom, his deep voice painting pictures of stars and seasons. Ephraim would lead them in Amish hymns, the German words blending surprisingly well with Ute melodies. Children sat wide-eyed as tales and songs wove together, creating something new and beautiful. One evening, after the dishes were dried and put away, Ephraim took Hazel's hand. "Come," he whispered, leading her outside. Samuel nestled contentedly between them as they stepped into the star-filled night. Hazel gazed up at the vast sky, her heart full. "I never dreamed such joy could follow such shame," she said softly. Remembering that terrible day at the auction yard, Ephraim's hand tightened gently around hers. "Providence writes straighter than men's cruelty," he answered, his voice tender with wisdom. Their lips met in a gentle kiss as Samuel stirred against them, a family forged in mercy's fire. Above them, stars scattered like promises across the Colorado night, witnesses to love's quiet triumph. Thanks for watching. Stories like this shape us in ways we don't always expect. If something resonated, subscribe. I'm back tomorrow with another one worth hearing.